Also, I'd like to thank Edgar and BayREN for inviting me to speak today. So I'll start by telling you just a little bit about green building codes. You're going to learn a lot more from the experts on Calgary today. I'm going to talk about it from one of my perspectives, which is being an elected official in Portola Valley. So I'll start out with a little background about myself and about Portola Valley. A little bit of an overview on kind of green building policy, the big picture, kind of what I've learned as far as how things are being enforced. I'm not sure a lot of you know, but I learned a lot comparing notes between jurisdictions. Some options that I see out there that I think are sort of some of which are worth pursuing and some of which aren't, and how to, the idea of how they might look to someone that sits in my second hat, which is a public official. And then looking ahead at opportunities that we have with the codes and with everything that's happening. So a little bit about me first. I am a council member in Portola Valley. I have been since 2011. Before I joined the council, I was a member of our Architecture and Site Control Commission for 3 years. My original training, like so many people, is in laboratory biology. It's a natural segue into this kind of career, of course. 7 years ago, I changed careers, and I now work primarily as an energy and green building consultant. And in that function, I am a CA through Quebec. I work as a HERS rater, and I also am a Green Point rater and a certified green building professional. I also, as a council member, represent Portola Valley to San Mateo County's Community Choice and Aggregation Entity, Peninsula Clean Energy, which, as I'm sure many of you know, is San Mateo County's government-run electricity aggregation organization, which will now be selling electricity generation to ratepayers in San Mateo County starting next week. I'm the vice chair of the board of that group, and so it overlaps a lot of what we're talking about because, two of our big sort of missions would be offering renewable and GHG-free electricity and also promoting local efficiency and renewables projects. Now, being a council member and being a green building professional, this puts me in the role of being the explainer in a lot of contexts to other elected officials who, one, don't really have a technical background, and two, have 10 or 12 other things they're thinking about. So I've learned how to try to explain what we're doing and why we do it concisely and hopefully clearly. I will apologize in advance if I'm telling you things you already know. I'll try to give this a slightly different perspective. The background on Portola Valley. We really aren't just located near Stanford University. Stanford actually owns land within Portola Valley, so we literally border the campus, and it's a big campus. The town was established in 1964 and has a population today of about 4,300, 1,800 homes. So we're a very small jurisdiction, and almost all of our use is single-family residences. We have probably less than a dozen truly intensive CUPs within town for a handful of local businesses. The town has always had what I'll call a green ethos. It was founded largely to sort of forestall some development projects that were being proposed at the time in the 60s, so there's a lot of open space. Our original town planners, George Mader and Tom Glassy, pioneered something called slope gradient density planning, which basically means if you live near an earthquake fault, don't put a lot of houses on hills. And so they did a lot of pioneering work on that. So we have what are, I think, some very well-designed clustered residential developments. So we're using our land, I think, fairly judiciously in our most recent large projects. And by the way, this is our town center, and it's about 200 yards from the San Andreas Fault. The San Andreas Fault used to run directly underneath our elementary school. That changed about three or four decades ago. So we think a lot about seismic safety, and I'll have more to say on that as we get into the subject matter. We've had it for over a decade now. We've had a sustainability element in our general plan that we're very proud of, and we've tried to keep sort of on the cutting edge. This town center was a LEED Platinum facility, and at the time, I believe, was the first local government LEED Platinum facility. It was completed in 2009, and was funded entirely by private donations. So there's a lot of community backing for this sort of for sustainability and green initiatives. Our local green credentials are one of our top employees is Brandon DeGarmo. She is our sustainability manager, has worked with the town in various sustainability roles since 2007. One of our newest employees is Keith Weiner, who is now our building inspector, and we in fact have one building inspector. He came on just this year. He is also our first building inspector to be a certified green building professional. Another great development, and I'll have more to say about that as well. So because people are constantly asking me, and I presumably all of you, why are we doing this again? I just want to talk about kind of the big picture. What is your jurisdiction getting out of all the various initiatives that have taken place in the last decade or so on green building? Obviously, I focused on kind of the two, I would say the most visible outcome benefits. One is energy, one is water. With energy, obviously, we're managing our energy consumption, reducing carbon footprints. This has become a very visible topic, obviously, in the last few years, especially since Kyoto and now Paris. A lot of this comes down also to public image. There's a lot of, I get a lot of comments from people about what are we doing to fight climate change. And really, I mean, the local governments have become one of the battlegrounds of climate change. The federal government has been very gridlocked. California as a state has shown a lot of leadership, but really a lot of this is happening at local levels. And I'm happy to see that happening, for one. The other big high-profile issue, of course, has been water with our drought. And so I'm sure that a lot of, when you're talking to your elected leaders about water, they understand a little bit about why it's important to start thinking about this in all of your codes, including your building codes. So again, there are plenty of other impacts of sustainability and rebuilding, but these are the two that seem to be getting the most attention at the highest level. And everyone agrees that green is good, but the questions are always about how you actually achieve it and what you're actually getting as you implement these things. So just quickly, Title 24, or Title 24 Part 6, the Building Energy Efficiency Standards, which is a wide range of building requirements. And again, I apologize, I'm sure most of you are familiar with this. Wide range of building requirements, almost every aspect of the building except for the plug loads and the things you use inside the building. The 3-year code cycles, which are now moving down to a zero net energy standard in 2020. And the benefits of this obviously are reducing carbon footprints. And since Title 24 became part of the law in 1974, California has kept its per capita electricity use flat, whereas the rest of the country has, on average, increased per capita use by about 50%. And to me, this speaks volumes to the effectiveness of good policy, in the sense that we've actually, because we've done this, we've actually managed to delay or avoid a lot of new electricity and general transmission requirements. Not indefinitely, but we've actually been able, in my opinion, to be a little bit smarter and forward-looking about how our power grid will look in the future. And that's, again, something that's coming down the line. I won't talk about much today, but it's something we think about a lot with Peninsula Clean Energy. And then there's CalGreen, which we were going to talk about today, which, and a few things about this that I find challenging. One is that it's a very wide variety of measures with different goals. Obviously, water is a big part of CalGreen measures, energy efficiency, reduced use of materials, reduced waste, promoting renewables, and also Brandy Garma reminded me about things like indoor air quality, and interior health and safety, which are also important. And as Keith, our building official, pointed out, it really touches on every other code that a building official has to think about. So it really is related to energy code, plumbing, mechanical. It's if you include green point rating as part of a REACH code, it's obviously very closely tied to that. And of course, it's a state requirement, but it is enforced by local jurisdictions. And I guess sort of the thing that keeps coming back to me about this is just how complicated it is for many of you building officials to incorporate this into everything else you're thinking about. I mean, most building officials, and very rightly so, are thinking about making sure the building is seismically safe, for example. They've got a lot of other priorities, and so it's become more and more complicated, in my opinion. And so the question is, what can your local leaders do to help you, to make this job easier for you, to make it more effective, and what can they do that gets more value and benefit out of these various sustainability codes? So I did as part of my preparation for this talk, I did a survey of the handful of local building officials that I know, asking them a few questions about how they're actually enforcing this currently, how well that's working, and just things that they're thinking about implementing, things they have implemented. I tried to get what I would say sort of what I see as the facts on the ground. And I apologize, I'm probably telling you things either that you already know or things that are incorrect. And please feel free to ask questions or correct me as needed. So how are green building codes as a group enforced? And so the two main stages obviously are plan check and field inspections. So in plan check, you submit a CF1R, and I mention that because that's something that I do on a regular basis for building projects. The CalGreen measures are often included as plan notes, so that when you submit a building plan, they are included as notes within those plans. All this paperwork is reviewed by either by a local agency or in some cases, including Portola Valley, it's sent to an outside plan checker. It's approved as part of a permit issuance. With the newest Energy Code 2013, we started requiring registration of these CF1Rs for most, not all projects. So now you have this new element of being able to say that the CF1R is now registered with CalCerts, Cheers, or USERRA. And the field inspections, you've always kind of had these site inspections by your local officials, who are now including CalGreen along with everything else they've been inspecting for all these years. Some paperwork completed and filed by installing contractors. And now the new elements in 2013 were the requirements for third-party testing. So first testing became a much more integral part of building in 2013. And registration, the electronic registry. And this electronic registration has been an interesting experience for me. I'm sure it has for many of you too. And I want to talk, I'll get more to that in a second, because I think it represents significant challenges, but also significant opportunities for us. So this was kind of my very, very brief summary of how things are currently being enforced. And how people actually deal with this at the local level. And so obviously, kind of the traditional way of doing this has been inspection of plans and inspection of job sites by building officials. That's how, everyone does that. What else? The things that happen on top of that vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, I found. One of the simplest additions would be a lot of jurisdictions now require a checklist that the applicant completes. I have personally seen CalGreen checklists sort of adapted from the code. I've also seen Building Green checklists used as kind of a voluntary self-certification by an applicant as part of their permit application. A step above that, I've also seen jurisdictions where the checklist has to be completed and signed by a third-party rater. I do this for a small number of jurisdictions, but not all of them by a long shot. And I'll talk more about sort of the costs and benefits of all these things. Before 2013, I was seeing a lot of jobs that required Green Point certification. I'm not seeing as much of that now, but through the 2008 code, a lot of REACH codes included some requirement for Green Point certification. So this was happening. It seems to be happening less now. It certainly is not happening right now in Portola Valley, and from what I gather, it's not happening in a lot of other jurisdictions as a required certification. And that's different from where a Green Point rater fills out the checklist and essentially signs off on a self-certification. And what I'm also seeing, but not everywhere, is building department review of the registered documents. And so every now and then, for a project, I have to talk to a local building inspector, and he has to see that the CF1R, CF2Rs, and CF3Rs are all on CalCerts or Cheers or USERRA. Doesn't happen everywhere. It's actually not happening right now in Portola Valley, although I think it will be part of the green building code that we're currently working on. But I've seen it happening more and more, and some of the local officials have told me that in fact BayREN is the one that sort of measured them in the direction of requiring and actually going and looking at the electronic registries. So I think that's a great development, and I hope that that trend continues. What I wanted to talk to you next, and now I'm trying to put on my elected official hat. A lot of you I know are answering to an elected official or somebody who does answer to an elected official. And one of the things that I was there were a couple things I wanted to accomplish with this talk. And one was to get a little better feel for what's really happening out there among jurisdictions. And the other was thinking about how someone like me, but without my technical, that doesn't have my background, is looking at everything that you're doing and how you might want to present this to them, or what they might be looking for when they're considering kind of next steps or things you could add to your enforcement regimes. What are options that I see out there that might be worthwhile, and how do you present them to, for example, a council in a way that they can kind of understand, and that your council members want to know what this is getting them and what it's going to cost them to do it. That's kind of, they really don't have a lot of time to dig into the details of CalGreen or Title 24 or these things. So it's really kind of what I'm trying to do. What I tried to collect was a set of things that I consider sort of options for enforcement, that what it takes to do them and what you're getting from them. And so the first one that I'll talk about is just what we're doing here today: sustainability training for building inspectors. I was very excited to learn that our new building official had been a green building professional for over 10 years, because I think that's obviously it's a great thing that it's obviously another hat that he's wearing, but I think it's a great thing that we're seeing more integration of the green building codes along with every other building code that's being enforced. Obviously, the training is available on-site or conveniently off-site, largely thanks to BayREN. The advantages are it's widely available, it costs little or nothing, and it puts the knowledge in the hands of the person who's actually doing the inspections. And given the choice between a sustainability department talking to a building department and a building department understanding sustainability, you can see where the latter is going to have a lot fewer complications, and probably putting the knowledge in the hands of the acting official is, in my opinion, always a good thing. The shortcoming, of course, is that that person who's actually doing the inspection has 10 other things they're thinking about with every project. So, again, most local jurisdictions are in fact doing this. They're pushing this. I think it's great, and I hope that I would certainly. There's no question it should be continued and be sort of promoted. The next one, which I do see out there, are these client-completed checklists. Some of them are basically the CalGreen measures in a checklist where the client signs, checks, yes, I'm doing this, and then in some cases you actually ask, for example, for the plan note for ventilation is on sheet A10. You get a detail of where it appears in the construction set. And it can either be that CalGreen checklist or a CalV checklist or the Green Point checklist adapted for this. It's not really verified by a third party, although it can be, of course, be reviewed by the building staff. The advantage of this is it doesn't really cost anything. It doesn't take a lot of time or effort to fill out these checklists. And as one official put it to me, it gets the applicant thinking about some of these measures. They may or may not do them, but at least it's raising some awareness of it out in the community. And so for virtually no cost, you actually get people thinking. And some of them will actually go out and do this. Some of them will become very aggressive. Many of them won't. And the disadvantages, I said no enforcement value. There is some enforcement value, but obviously it's very hard to, you're not really going to, you can't really verify, how much you're getting from these measures. I think it's again, it's a good step. It's a very easy one, I think, to do, and it's certainly a good place to start. So then one step beyond that is the checklist filled out by a third party, where a third party rater, and most commonly I've seen Green Point raters used for this, fills out a checklist, and it can be the CalGreen checklist, it can be the Build It Green checklist, and that typically is done by a Green Point rater. It's completed, the checklist is filled out as part of the permit application, and then a form is required and signed off by the third party rater before occupancy is issued. The advantages of this is you actually add an accountable professional to your application process, and you should get verification that some of these measures are actually being installed. So now you're getting, I'd say you're getting a significant step up in terms of the likelihood of compliance with the code, the likelihood that you're actually going to add these measures in. Again, for a fairly small, not zero, but a small added cost, and a fairly small amount of added labor, and it's almost all on the applicant side. So from a local jurisdiction's perspective, there's again very little cost and something that has the potential to have a significant payoff. It does add some administrative burden to building staffs. If anyone wants to share more about that, I'm all ears. But again, I would argue that it's a fairly small investment to make for something. And when you add a third party, I do think it actually gives you benefits that you don't get from just having a building owner self-certify. So, moving on to be more aggressive, you could go back to requiring Green Point certification basically through a REACH code. And like I said, I have not seen a lot of these things being implemented since the code change in 2013. And again, it's a more aggressive step, but I think it would definitely get more compliance and certainly more benefits from requiring that certification, having certified many projects for this very purpose in previous code cycles. So obviously, the requirement for green certification through Build It Green. A few jurisdictions used to require LEED, but I've seen a lot less of that lately. And Green Point by itself requires that 10% margin of compliance over the energy code. So just by requiring Green Point certification, you're requiring a 10% improvement over Title 24. It's required final sign-off, and what I typically do is write a letter to the authority saying that the project will target X number of points, and then I have maybe 6 months after the project is occupied to actually complete the certification, so I can do the paperwork while the owner is back in their house. The advantage here is that you are getting a verified and enhanced sustainability for the project through green point certification. It's a very high standard. It also gives you the opportunity to track the benefits of this in the future because you actually have a much better record of what happened on that site. So you can now start going back and looking at measures, and you could, if you were sort of interested in data analysis, start looking at these things and saying, well, this is what we actually got from requiring these or encouraging these particular measures. As a former scientist who likes data, I'm going to push things like this a lot. And obviously, the other advantage of this is green point rating includes a lot of the CalGreen measures. And in past code cycles, Portola Valley certainly used green point rating kind of as a way of measuring its CalGreen. It's an option, and it's being used in the sort of voluntary certification process. But if you start requiring green point certification, you're also getting a lot of the CalGreen measures signed off just within that process. The disadvantages, it's a significant added cost. The Build the Green certification is now, I think it's about $420 just to register the project with them, and depending on the project, it comes out to $1,000 to $2,000 more dollars for the resident, for the applicant to pay. It's not everyone. You occasionally get people complaining about it. I've seen pushback on it. I think in the big scheme of things, and the overall cost of projects, certainly in our area, it's usually a pretty relatively small expense, but it is an expense, and your elected leaders will see this and worry about that kind of pushback. So it's in some ways the most aggressive. Well, it is the most aggressive way to go in this direction, but it gets you something that I think is significantly better than either of the first two options, either the homeowner simply certifying or even a third-party rater simply signing off on the project, because it's in the database, and now you could actually go back and audit these things if you so chose, or look at them in the future. And so the last thing I want to talk about, because, partly because it's something I'm familiar with, is the verification of registered documents. And so basically, building officials now, in some cases, are locally verifying that the CF1Rs, 2 CF2Rs, and CF3Rs are uploaded to the qualifying registry before issuing an occupancy permit. And that's code. That's actually sort of, that's all this, the registration is required. But it's still not every local jurisdiction is actually going out and doing that. And so, but a handful of them are. And again, I think that this is one that I feel strongly about becoming more of a standard practice. The advantage is that it's actually, once you've figured out CalCert's tiers in USERA, it's easy and fast for a building official to go in and look at one of those registries and make sure that everything is there. It takes advantage of what's already out there. You already have now an infrastructure occurs rater. You already have CalCert's tiers in USERA. It's already part of the code, so it's all being done. It's just a question of going back and just double checking that it's there. And it provides for verification, not just that the work was done, but exactly what was done. So again, you've got this potential for the future quantitative analysis of the benefits of these things. As you see more and more measures being implemented, and you know where they were implemented and which projects, you have the chance to go back and look at those projects and see, are we really getting what we expect to get from this measure or that measure? And again, as somebody who likes to see their public policies tied to data, this to me is a huge opportunity for us going forward. The disadvantage is, it does take some. CalCert's tiers in USERA are not always intuitive to use. I'll tell you that as a user. It takes some understanding. It's a new process. It's not necessarily an easy thing to fit into an existing building process, but it's definitely achievable. And as far as taking this back to your local leaders and sort of suggesting it, it's really it's nothing more than taking what's already out there being enforced and codifying it in a way that really captures the benefits of it in a way that you can both quantitate going forward and actually very easily enforce. So, yeah, question?
You said earlier that registration is required in most projects. I've run into jurisdictions where they're demanding registration on every project,
yeah,
regardless.
Yes.
And there has to be a basis for registration.
Yeah, agreed.
Right? So I want to make it clear that it's not necessarily required on all projects.
No, that's an excellent point, and I'll repeat that just in case you couldn't hear it online. But the point that was made was that some jurisdictions are now demanding registration of every project, regardless of the scope of the project. And that's not actually the requirement. The requirement that HERS testing and registration are required for certain projects, certain measures are being added. And I think it's very important for local jurisdictions to get that right, in the sense that I've seen a lot of, when I talk to contractors, they start getting upset when they're forced to register or test something where the requirement was not clearly there. So enforcing these things fully, but enforcing them accurately and fairly is a really important point. Thank you. So again, I've now started encountering this in projects throughout the Bay Area, but it is not a uniform practice among building jurisdictions. And again, as far as things that can enhance compliance and benefits of green building codes at a fairly minimal cost to implement, this is probably near the top of my list, and one that I do occasionally talk to my colleagues on other councils about adopting and considering. Looking ahead, obviously REACH codes have been used in the past and are being used in some jurisdictions again. And I think a lot of the cost effectiveness now is in place with this last code cycle, with 2013. I'm always confused about that one, but do you know? Okay. Obviously, you need the cost effectiveness studies, and I know that's been an impediment in past code cycles. One thing I've seen out there is that as the energy code gets closer to zero net energy for residential, it's getting harder to politically justify these REACH codes, because people are saying, well, we're already pushing the code very far. We're already pushing to zero net energy. Why do you want something on top of that? So again, I think there's benefits to it, but I recognize, and I think a lot of local jurisdictions are recognizing that this is just it's become a heavier lift politically. I would still argue that there are other things you get from REACH codes beyond just the energy aspect of it. But again, it's getting harder and harder to push them, I'll put it that way. And this is, I'll get on my soapbox here for a minute again as a former scientist. Performance studies. So we're now amassing these large databases of projects that where we have basically all the documentation of what was done and how it was done. We have CF1Rs now predicting your energy use pretty precisely. We're in a position now in the next few years to start actually going back in that database and looking at some of these projects and saying, did we actually get what we thought we were getting when we implemented all those measures? So a couple of things. One is validation of what we're actually already doing for energy efficiency measures, most of which end up focusing on heating, cooling, and hot water heating. And then we start getting into, what are we really getting from plug loads? What's actually working as far as regulating not just the building's conditioning energy and the water heating energy, but also just the other energy use from living in a building these days. Because plug loads, as you know, are becoming to dominate the energy use in a lot of our structures, especially as the structures themselves get better. So again, this is just looking ahead. Can we start looking at registered, completed projects, tracking their energy use, and really trying to get even a better feel for what our various requirements are getting us. And for me, again, when I think about policy, I like to have some kind of data accompanying the policy itself. And so, it's just something to think about for the future. Something I look forward hopefully to seeing in the coming years. So what are my take homes here? The first, I hope you've seen, is that there are a wide range of options to capture more benefits from your green building codes through enforcement. Those options range pretty widely in the cost to implement, and they also range very widely in the benefits. In my opinion, there are a lot of options out there now that effectively capture benefits at a fairly acceptable expense, especially many of them end up being expenses for the builder. They don't actually cost the jurisdiction much. I won't say nothing, but they're very small expenses. And again, elected leaders are looking for results. They want to understand why they're implementing something new, especially if it's going to get pushback from the community. And they're looking for results they can get that don't involve huge investments or complicated, a lot of complicated messaging. And so, again, a lot of opportunities to explain the benefits and the costs, and try to explain it as kind of simply as you can to the decision makers. Because at the end of the day, they care about this. Nobody disagrees with the notion that building our buildings better or building them greener is a good thing. They just want to know how they can do it in a way that's not sort of making their lives or the lives of their constituents more difficult. And so again, explain it simply, but there's plenty of things out there that I think are worth pursuing as far as both enforcing the code more effectively, but also giving you what you need to enforce the code adequately. Because I know that you building officials are overworked. I know you have way too many things you're thinking about on a daily basis, and we're honestly I'm looking for ways to make your job easier, more fun, and more effective. I will thank a few people. Within Portola Valley, Randy Dugarmo has been with the town for almost 10 years now. She's our building manager now. I'm sorry, I got that wrong on the slide here. And Keith Weiner, who is our new building official, both who kind of talked me through a lot of what I told you today, and hopefully helped me get it right. The mistakes are mine. Within the county, I've worked with Rachel Launder and Andrea Chow, and Andrea is the one who I think originally invited me to speak today. So if you want this half hour of your life back, talk to Andrea. And finally, thanks again to BayREN for inviting me here and for putting on these trainings. So I will stop there, and I'll be happy to take questions.
So question, with regards to making the buildings more energy efficient and all that, and also water use, with a lot of people that I've worked with my clients is, yeah, you make them look efficient, but then on the other side, PG&E, water companies, because they're not using enough, they're charging, substantially more on their, so somehow that has to go back to the government or the regulators to not allow them to do that, because you're trying to implement something, but then on the back end, you're making a paperwork for it.
Yes, that is true. Yeah, and so, and the other hat I wear with Peninsula Clean Energy, where we are now in effect competing with PG&E. Yes, it's a huge issue in the electricity field, especially. Also, somewhat in the gas delivery. But yeah, efficiency is cutting into PG&E's and other IOUs' profits. There was a movement in the 90s called, and it's happened across the country, called decoupling, which sought to disconnect some of that profitability from the volume of electricity delivered. It's not perfect. PG&E does still obviously have an incentive to sell you more electricity. And that tension, it's not going away. I think, the CCAs, the CCAs, the one in Marin, the one in Sonoma, the one in San Francisco that's just launched, we will be the 5th active CCA in San Mateo County. It's introducing an element of competition to that, and it's also introducing an entity that does not have the same profit motive that an investor-owned utility has. So I think it's changing the playing field a bit. That question of how you incentivize a large utility to sell less electricity, it's been an ongoing argument. It's not going away. It's more complicated than I can answer here. But again, it's the right question to be asking, and it's something that a lot of, and San Mateo County, we've thought about it extensively, and it keeps me awake at night, I'll put it that way. So, thank you. That's the best I can answer it right now. Yeah. Other questions?
So actually, Keith Weiner was trained by our city.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
And that time it was a different kind of context. We had a chief building official who was on the green building committee for the Alvo. We decided to train all of our inspectors in Green Point Vision. And then we got federal money to get them PERS trained. Since then, the fiscal crisis hit. We have a new building official who came from Florida, doesn't know much about California context. A lot of our building, not only plan checkers, but also inspectors are part-time contract. So the landscape has changed in a lot of small cities in terms of being able to have that kind of training. So what do because there is a tendency now to try to get away from the long-term pension liabilities.
Yes.
Building departments are kind of being dismantled in a lot of ways. So how would you suggest people move forward?
That's a great point. I think it's a tough sell, especially we're a small jurisdiction, and we're a jurisdiction that's it's frankly pretty affluent. So we do not have costs of our projects are typically not a huge barrier for the people that are coming to, that are applicants. That's not true everywhere by a long shot. A lot of other cities obviously are struggling financially. And, and I don't have an easy solution for that. Some of these, some of what I'm suggesting are things that I think are manageable, even for a smaller or part-time, and maybe you disagree with that. I think, what I was thinking about is, what are, and I admit that I don't have a whole lot of experience with sort of larger, more complicated jurisdictions, but I was trying to think of things that are fairly straightforward to implement, that do get some benefit, and I mean, especially with something like checking registrations, document registrations, it's a pretty tangible thing you're getting that doesn't take a whole lot of time. And the best answer would be for city councils everywhere to make sure that their building departments are adequately funded. Failing that, I think we're trying to fill in the gaps with whatever small, simple steps we can take to just see that people are actually thinking about the building code and hopefully following them more closely.
Right, I totally agree. That's why we had everybody in terms of
Yeah.
having a building inspection rather than the sustainability person just coming and bugging everybody.
Yes.
It makes a huge difference. We have one inspector left from that time, and he's really great at compliance and knows green code and purpose really well. So
Yeah.
it's very valuable to do that. I just am.
Well, and I got to say that having the continuity, having people that have been in your department for a longer period of time, both just for institutional knowledge, but also for interacting with the clients, it's a huge advantage. And if your policy has become to outsource a lot of that, it's hard. I would certainly argue that there's advantages to having at least part of that staff being full time and within the town. As far as how to make that happen politically, it's like I said, it's a tough sell. I recognize that, and I think a lot of councils now are. I think councils are stuck between this kind of rock and a hard place where they have less money to spend on these things, but they do, I think, recognize the benefits. And the best argument I can say is to just explain what you're getting and why it's important, and how you can get it at sort of the smallest cost to them that you can feasibly propose. Yes.
Here, Aalfs, you started by talking about how sometimes you stay away and thinking about how to communicate some of these messages to your colleagues and other officials.
Yes.
A room like this, where there's many little messages we brought back to other local communities today. This is a really complicated conversation.
Yes.
If you could think about your top two messages that you would communicate to your colleagues, other than officials, prioritize this type of work and fund building permits program. Any criminals?
I guess when people ask me, why I push for green building and sustainability, I ask them what planet they think their children are going to grow up on. What planet they think their grandchildren are going to grow up on. For me, that answer is Earth. If you've got a plan B in mind, I'm all ears. But and I guess that's a long-winded way of saying that it matters what we're doing, and that it's sort of that to ignore all of these things at the for budget's sake or for expedience sake is being, in my mind, incredibly penny-wise and pound-foolish. But again, it does cost money to do these things, and it can be a political lift to make them happen. And so, people want to do the right thing, but sometimes you have to make it really easy for them to do the right thing. And so the message would be one that, we all do these things and we push these things because they're important and they matter. And the other is there are ways to make them happen, to make them better, not perfect, but better, at costs that I think most people would find acceptable, and that they can be made to happen in ways. And the trick is to find the places, find the lowest hanging fruit and try to and make sure they're aware of it, and make sure they're aware of it in a way that they can really quickly understand that a fairly small allocation of resources can get them a real benefit. The more you can make that argument clear to them, I think in a fairly a period of time that doesn't require them to spend 3 hours learning the intricacies of Cal Green or Title 24. The more likely they are to listen to you and take even just that first small step. And every little step counts. So it's not all gonna happen overnight. But if you can identify the small, easy steps for them to do, that's really kind of what they're looking for.